In 2015, surprisingly enough, the Denver Broncos were Super Bowl champions. And in 2016, they failed to even reach the playoffs. Now, when I look at the Denver Broncos, they definitely have one of the best, if not the best, defense in the NFL. However, their offensive woes are still there, but most of the blame belongs to the quarterback position. Now, Trevor Siemian isn't awful, but he isn't the playmaker that they need, but it's the playmaker that they deserve. Now, when it comes to the Broncos, they're one of the few teams that truly that their bread and butter defensive style is man-to-man coverage. Most teams like to go to a zone due to the fact of Seattle, and Seattle's had fantastic success. And even John Elway has admitted that he started to model after the Seattle Seahawks. If you don't believe me, articles in the description. So you're talking about, well, one team's a zone team and one team's a man team. Yes, but I also look at it and see that John Elway built for the secondary. He definitely built a great secondary cornerback tandem. I think that's still the best cornerback tandem in the league. He had a good pair of safeties when they were still playing there. Obviously, T.J. Ward, he's now going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and all of that. So there was some modeling, and it was a very well-rounded defense, similar to the 2013 well-rounded defense, because really I can't look at a single weakness or a single weak spot of that 2013 defense for the Seahawks. Now, with the Broncos, there's very few teams that play that man defense. Obviously, I think having Chris Harris there, he's a very interesting guy. He's the one guy that you can help to cover a Julian Edelman, kind of one of these underneath receivers, because most of the time, people are investing into these tall, lanky corners, and that's not necessarily bad, but Chris Harris is kind of this odd man out, or this kind of this outcast in the sense of his style, because if you look at Sherman, tall cornerback, Patrick Peterson is a tall cornerback. You got Jalen Ramsey, he's drafted high. He was a tall cornerback. George Jenkins is a tall cornerback. And when you just go down the line, there's a lot of these tall corners, and a lot of them that tend to play zone just because of how difficult it is to play defense in the NFL. But the Broncos can still play their man defense very well, and obviously, and it even helps even more when you have Von Miller coming from one of the sides just to sack the quarterback constantly and pressure them. So when I look at this, the Denver Broncos, obviously, for a team that had a great defense, they definitely started off well. They started off the season 4-0. However, when they faced the Atlanta Falcons week 5, things went down real fast. Their record went 5-7 after that. Yes, they had a losing record. And now the reason why they had a losing record is I partially put it on Kyle Shanahan. I think Kyle Shanahan delivered an excellent game plan that even teams started to model after the beat-up. The Kansas City Chiefs, I believe, modeled a little bit after the Falcons' game plan. I also believe that the New England Patriots modeled a little bit after their game plan to face the Denver Broncos. Because the Broncos kind of built this defense to build the New England Patriots. Against the Patriots, you got to have a pass rush. You got to sack them. You also got to have a good man coverage so they can cover the corners for X amount of seconds. And when you had that, you have the Falcons who have a running game. Unlike the Patriots usually don't run the ball, and a deep ball game, which is not necessarily Tom Brady's forte. So when you're starting to run the ball and throw the ball deep, and that's not exactly how the defense was built to made, it was exploited. Now, the defense wasn't exploited that terribly. It was still, the Falcons still scored it somewhere in around the 20s, I believe. But if you look at that, that was still a great game plan, and a lot of people thought, let's start modeling after this. This is what worked against the Denver Broncos. Now, obviously, I still think that most of the blame belongs to the offense. However, I believe that the Atlanta Falcons, Kyle Shanahan's game plan helped figure out the Broncos and actually led them to their demise. So, ideally, their defense is great and all, but their defense might not be great enough to carry them to the playoffs. And we have seen this before. We have seen number 1 ranked defense fail to bring teams to the playoffs before. I think the 2010 San Diego Chargers, even when they had the number 1 ranked offense too, number 1 ranked offense and number 1 ranked defense, they only went 9-7 because they had the worst special teams unit in the NFL. Yes, special teams still matters. And also the 90 San Diego Chargers, sure, they went to a Super Bowl and all. However, there are so many times in the 90s where they had this great defense, but their offense couldn't freaking deliver. They had freaking Ryan Leaf, for God's sakes. And so it's really on the offense right here. And when you look at Siemian is the playmaker that they don't need, but it's the playmaker that they deserve. Because for some reason, Paxton Lynch cannot freaking play, and he hasn't started yet, which is a little bit concerning for a first-round pick. Yes, usually by the second year, he should be starting. And I don't want to put it on the injury, because even if Paxton Lynch was healthy, Trevor Siemian would still get the job, and that's a concern right there. If you look at John Elway's perspective, now I talked about this a little bit in my other video about how John Elway would prefer to have Paxton Lynch over Trevor Siemian. Now, when you look at John Elway, when he was drafted in 1984, a lot of people consider him as the next big prospect. Obviously, if you look at Andrew Luck, if you thought Andrew Luck was big in 2012, go to what John Elway was in 1984. Yes, he was so big that even Bill Walsh wanted to trade Joe Montana for John Elway. He was that special of a talent right there, because John Elway was a big quarterback. He could run, and he had a hell of an arm. And when you look at that, a lot of people thought this guy was going to be the big deal. And he was also a two-sport athlete to top it off. There's a Sport Illustrated article talking about whether he's the next John Unitas or Mickey Mantle, and that's obviously he was a very talented individual. And when I look at Paxton Lynch and Trevor Siemian, Lynch is definitely the more athletic one out of all of them. We're the most physically gifted. Now, when it comes to Lynch, I definitely think that he's not a John Elway-esque kind of prospect. He's not at the same talent level. The closest thing we ever had to a John Elway-esque prospect was Andrew Luck. However, I would still put John Elway ahead of him, and Paxton Lynch was a low first-round pick. Talented guy, but he wasn't that talented. But I still look at it that John Elway probably wants a quarterback that plays similar to him, that can go from there. And the reason why they're starting Siemian, well, you have to be fair and start the better player. You can't just go out there and start the worst player just because you like their style. I think that they would rather have that style out there. They want to play making quarterback. That's just how it works. Their offensive line isn't great. I know they signed Donald Leary and they drafted Garrett Bowles in the first round. So they're obviously trying to improve on the front. But they also need to get to those wide receivers a lot. John Elway likes to go 3 wide receiver deep. He likes to have 3 wide receiver deep, and he also likes to have a receiving tight end. And so he really wants a quarterback that can make plays out there. And Siemian, that ain't Siemian. And obviously having a game-managing quarterback right there is going to be struggling. So I just feel as if they can have an offense that could average somewhere around 20 or something points a game, maybe around like 24, 25, and maybe hit the 30 mark every now and then, that would be good. That would be good enough to make a playoffs. I think that's an 11-5 team. And sure, that might be only 2 more wins than last year, but 9-7, between 9-7 and 11-5 is a big difference from making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. Now, 11-5 teams have missed the playoffs before, but you're more likely to make the playoffs at 11-5 than you are to make it 9-7 usually. So I just look at this, and I think the Broncos can definitely make the playoffs in 2017. I think so, too. However, I just think Trevor Siemian needs to become a playmaker, or C.J. Anderson has to freaking go off. Anderson, I know at ESPN Fantasy Football absolutely loves C.J. Anderson. He hasn't really developed as well, and so they kind of knocked him down a little bit, that he's not nearly as good. But ideally, hopefully that would get better for the Broncos, and that O-line play could go there. So when I look at it, I definitely think the Broncos can make the playoffs. However, their quarterback play is going to need to improve and become the playmaker that they need.